Hello.
We've got a great house band. He's competing tonight because they're playing tonight.
Ooh.
Pete Oxley.
Is there jazz tonight?
He's playing tonight at the Half Moon down on.
All right.
Starts at 9:15. So I might leave you early.
So we can go we can see some good jazz after.
Yeah, you'll go on till about midnight.
All right. But the spin is Thursday, no?
Spin is Thursday. This is once a month they do the Half Moon. Hammond organ, sax,
Or is it on sax?
guitar and drums.
Great, man.
Thank you everyone for coming this evening. It's a great privilege to welcome again here. Some of you may have seen him on Thursday play at the Spin in Oxford. Just out of interest, how many people were there on Thursday? Wow. Gilad, if you didn't know, is one of the finest jazz saxophonists in the world. Some would say the finest, but that's probably more...
My mum.
That's probably more debatable than your book. So welcome very much to Gilad. Thank you for coming. And thank you also to, and welcome to Ray Keenoy, who's also going to speak for a little bit at the beginning. Both concerned... Gilad's got a book out which came out several years ago now, actually, so it's old hat. It's called The Wandering Who.
1 year and a half. 18 months ago.
18 months ago, called The Wandering Who. Ray has got a whole series of books called The Babel Guides to World Literature, and he's just started this Babel anthology, which is for sale here. There are plenty of copies over there. You can get a signed copy at the end, if you want to pay for it. And this evening I thought we'd start, in a minute I'm going to ask Gilad just to give a very, very brief précis of what his argument is, and then Ray is going to spend 10, 12, 15 minutes talking about the book which he's read and about Gilad's arguments. He's going to, in a sense, give a rebuttal, I think, and then if anyone wishes to ask questions of Ray, please do so, and then I'm going to ask Gilad to speak. I think he's brought his off button tonight, so at about 8:45, 8:45, we'll be stopping, and then we'll show and watch the film, which was made again about 18 months ago, was it?
It was made, I don't know, for too long, but I think that it came out a few months ago.
Oh, only that recently?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Called Gilad and All That Jazz, which and the cameras followed you around for a year, was it?
2 years.
At least.
For
2 years.
2 years.
3 years, I think.
Okay, so it was late in the making. It was meant to be 1 year, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. So there'll be a 5-minute break while I turn off the lights, pull the curtains, and turn that thing on. So Gilad, first of all, please let's.
How many people here read the book? Okay, no, because I thought maybe to take it for one step further. Basically, to make it into one paragraph, I believe that since Israel defined itself as a Jewish state, and its airplanes and tanks that inflict quite a lot of damage on innocent lives, civilians usually, are decorated with Jewish symbols, we are more than entitled to ask, who are the Jews? What is Judaism? What is Jewishness? What is Zionism? How are all those terms connected to each other? How are they linked? And interestingly enough, these are exactly the questions that we are not allowed to ask in the West and in the English-speaking empire in particular. In the last 10-12 years, I became probably the world expert on that topic, not because I'm the most clever. I'm just the only one who was courageous enough to deal with it, because I decided that I don't want to work in university or in a government office. My findings are pretty disturbing, because we are dealing with issues to do with Jewish power, and it's a topic that we are not entitled to engage with. I think that this is the point where Mr. Kenoi will take over, and then I will address question or present this whole topic more thoroughly later.
Hi, I'm Ray Keenoy, Oxford-based publisher, director of Boulevard Books, author of The Babel Guide to Jewish Fiction. Dennis will sell you one of those as well as the other thing. He'll tell you a lot about Jewish history as well as literature. Dennis, our illustrious proprietor, asked me to discuss some of the issues Gilad raises in his book, The Wandering Who. I've actually got a few things in common with Gilad, being a friend of Deno, having great talent, and also an interest in the question of Jewish identity. And I'm also of Jewish descent. I'm not though a Zionist or some professional apologist for Israel. I'm a diaspora Jew and content to be one, proud even. I support Israel only in the sense that I support its right to exist, and I support its right to be criticised or even occasionally praised on the same basis as other countries. That is, as an imperfect, non-utopian, politics-riddled national state like all the rest of them are. My personal perspective on Mr. Atzmon's book is this. Years ago I was a postgraduate student in sociology looking at the questions of identity, nationalism and politics in general, and in particular in Catalonia, as it happens. I also took an MA in Yiddish literature and language at SOAS in London, and it's through the general sociological, anthropological and historical theories about nationalism and ethnicity that I weigh up Gilad's points. And in addition, I take especially what Yiddish authors, both fiction writers and essayists, wrote about Jewish identity and history for the specificities of the Jewish question. Saying Yiddish writers, by the way, implies they weren't Zionists, although there were some who were Zionists. I don't think that many of you come to hear me, more probably to hear Gilad, see the film about him, or just to drink Dennis's superb tea. Tea which is unique, actually. I can reveal it having both laxative and aphrodisiac properties. You have to ask him for special number 5.
Same time.
So I'm going to be brief. I could start with where I agree with Gilad. Jewish identity is problematic, complex and contested. Israel's existence, or maybe better, coexistence, is problematic and contested. Zionism is problematic, an ideology and a movement of its time. Essentially one nationalism amongst others in the great age of nationalisms and of other one-size-fits-all theories like socialism. And for me, Gilad raises quite a few issues that demonstrate these Judeo-Zionist problematics. But you knew a but was coming, didn't you? Did you know? Yeah, you did. Do you have any like Celtic heritage at all? Yeah, maybe. That's called having a second sight. As I said, but Gilad's arguments, as presented in his book, hold up book, remind me of the number 7 bus I used to take in London. Starts off somewhere very interesting. The British Museum, in fact. It takes a long, windy route past posh Queensway, sleazy Paddington, fabulous Ladbroke Grove, where, in nearby Portobello, so much bric-a-brac can be found. And it ends up finally in the sad urban deserts of East Acton. Gilad's book, like my dear old London bus, stops a lot, but never lingers. Ding ding, no hanging about. Jump out, make a point, cull an anecdote or two, bung in a tasty quote from some Zionist potentate of yore, and he's off again. Ding ding. If what you know of West London was based on hopping off at all the bus stops, but hopping straight back on again, you wouldn't know diddly squat. Though you could claim you'd been there and seen everything. You could write a book about it. The Wandering Number 7. Wonderful and exhilarating is the ride on that bus, and through Gilad's panoply of historical and theoretical bric-a-brac is, just like with the bus, there's a whole lot of places he doesn't go to. Never mind stop at long enough to pose a proper, reasoned, black, white, shades of grey argument about the history, destiny of the Jews and of Israel. No, he can't, because he bloody doesn't want to. This book, The Wandering Who, is a polemic in the hard left tradition. Tradition founded, I suppose, by that great humanitarian universal benefactor of prison guards and secret policemen on 3 continents, V.I. Lenin, Vlad the Impaler. The man who unleashed a military coup on a democratic and socialist-led government to institute the political terror of a tiny political minority over a whole society, starting a foreign tradition upheld to our day by the miserable hypocritical thugs that run China, the Castro clan who have run Cuba since '61, and Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un in North Korea. And the Leninist-style polemic, if you don't have my and I think Gilad's history in hard left, in or around hard left organisations, in his case I believe the Socialist Workers' Party, in mine the Young Communist League, and the Maoist Communist Party of Britain, Marxist-Leninist. So if you've never read Lenin or Stalin or Mao Zedong, they all take the same approach. The polemic is not about presenting evidence or thought from different perspectives or viewpoints. It's about starting from a convinced standpoint, from a mind totally made up, and then marshalling whatever bits of evidence or argument buttress your standpoint. And that's exactly what you find here. Any in-depth examination that might raise a doubt doesn't get a look in. Okay, anecdote time, because there's lots of anecdotes in here, so I'm going to feed you a couple too. Not being in those days a jazzer, I first came across the Atzmon brand when I bought his novel A Guide to the Perplexed 10 years ago. The topic seemed interesting. A story projecting the collapse of Israel and what might come after. A bit science fiction. It's set in the year 2052, I think. A bit political, interesting. But reading it, and I have to say 10 years ago I was much closer to Gilad's point of view than I am today, I found it an astoundingly bad piece of writing. But it was published by Serpent's Tail, a serious publishing house who specialised in contemporary and especially world fiction. Guys after my own heart. So the interesting thing became not the novel, which, please, see for yourself, it's still in print I think, or available. See for yourself, it's a narrative farrago, a non-novel, a bit of half-baked showing off. The interesting thing became, why has this been published?
24 languages as well.
Then I connected up, well, fine. Then I connected up the fact Gilad is an Israeli in revolt, big time, against Israel and its Zionist foundations. Then I made the connection that Serpent's Tail proprietor Pete Ayrton was one of the New Left Review, Verso Books guys before he set up his own publishing house, after he inherited that convenient family fortune. So it wasn't for its literary value this book got published by a serious fiction house, but because of its point of view. A point of view at that time anyway that was more safely attached to a Jew and or Israeli than someone who could facilely be accused of anti-Semitism. At this point, let me just remark that many people, I think, unconsciously assume a Jew can't be an anti-Semite. Well, can't a German be anti-German? Can you be English and be anti-English? I think so. I think we might find some anti-English English in this very room. I've been there myself. Well, now in these days we're all celebrating as one being, throbbing with patriotic joy and excitement about Her Majesty's 60 years, lording it over us pathetic serfs. Now I'm very pro-English. We beat Hitler and we gave the world rice pudding. Anyway, back to specifics. Jump cut. 10 years from Guide to the Perplexed and we get The Wandering Who. From a hard left but indie publisher in the States, John Harris's Zero Books. I do want to read you a little bit from another book from Zero Books, which gives you an idea of the context of this particular bit of publishing. It's called Beyond the Left by Stephen Harper. The ideological distortions of the conservative media from Fox News to Daily Mail are widely acknowledged, blah blah. But what if the Guardian newspaper and BBC News in fact constitute the most insidious forms of capitalist propaganda? In a wide-ranging and erudite polemic, Beyond the Left analyses capitalist news and current affairs media from a radical perspective. The book rejects the liberal and pluralist paradigms that often underpin critiques of the media, showing how media texts reflect and reinforce the material interests of the ruling class, arguing that the principal ideological menace today is posed not by the right wing but the left liberal media, as it co-opts and obscures radical political positions, and this is the bit I like, and reinforces a range of mystifications from anti-fascism and humanitarian war to green politics. Wow, Zero Bookstore. Oh, welcome to that one, you crypto-fascist Greens and Guardian readers. And if you don't agree with that, then it's 10 years hard labour, no male privileges, last people's court. As I mentioned, there are many places that the Gilad bus just doesn't stop at. And the critical one is this. The one that for me lets the fart out of his balloon. In the whole book, it's a proper sized book, the only nationality, the only ethnicity, the only claim to be an ethnicity he discusses is the Jewish one. Maybe there are a couple of lines about the Belgians or the Bangladeshis but I missed them, sorry. There is no general theory here about what ethnicity or nationality is that could be applied to any other group that understands itself as being an ethnic group or community. The best we get is a brief reference to Marx, whose ideas about nationality were outdated and chauvinistic even for his time, and there's a single derogatory reference to Johann Gottfried von Herder, an 18th century theorizer and popularizer of the idea of the national and cultural rights of smaller nations. The nations that Marx and Engels referred to as non-historical nations. I.e., unlike the magnificent French, English or Americans, these guys were just a bleeding nuisance who would get in the way of the working class making the great proletarian future. Herder compared small nations to the different wild flowers by the wayside, all God's creations in his way of thinking, and to be cherished and not trodden under. What a mystification, eh? Respect for diversity. Nasty. But in fact, and despite Gilad's apparent ignorance of it, not surprisingly, there's been a lot of thinking, study and work on nations and ethnicity since Marx's day. We're in the Albion today. Glorious perfidious Albion. Some itchy seminar in Gormandast. That's my code word for Oxford University. Feel free to borrow it. Gormenghast, of course, was Mervyn Peake's satiric creation. A huge and ancient edifice, well laden with gargoyles and aristocrats, dedicated to the ascendancy and privilege of the tiny mutant elite fostered within its towers, chambers and cellars. Happily, we're outside the walls of that dreary castle. It's a nice evening, so I'm just going to chuck two names at you to mug up on afterwards, if you want to know more. Hans Kohn, K-O-H-N, and Ernest Gellner, G-E-L-L-N-E-R, who wrote, widely spaced period, 2 intelligent, standard books on nationalism and ethnic identity. So, to summarise, very, very briefly, the post-Marx thinking on nationalism and ethnicity, which is also the thinking of the Yiddish essayists I mentioned before, a nation can be defined as a community that holds a commonality of beliefs, has a shared history and cultural heritage, such as language, and often, but not always, inhabiting a shared territory. The Yiddish theorisers of Jewish nationality had an additional key phrase, a shared fate. A shared fate which became even truer after people stopped writing essays in Yiddish and in their own day. Only a fairly loose and open definition like this one can actually describe the nations of the earth. For Gilad, like Marx, nations are like atoms were in the 19th century. Discrete, solid little items bouncing around and off each other.
You realise that the book is about identity.
Don't interrupt me, mate, because you're going to have your, go.
No,
Shut him up, Dennis.
It's a book about identity, not about nation. You missed
Can you, Dennis? You said you were going to ask him to behave himself.
G'day, let Ray finish and then...
No, I just want to save you the embarrassment right now before
Dennis, are you going to tell him to shut up or to give the floor to him?
Okay then. G'day, can you come back in a minute when Ray's finished?
No, I've
okay. Alright, that's how Gilad conducts a debate.
He just mentioned something.
No, I don't want to be interrupted. I'm going to say my very brief...
I respect it, but
you're trying to disrupt my...
Okay, did you finish?
Trying to disrupt my...
Did you finish?
Okay.
Did you finish?
Dennis, go up there and conduct this fucking meeting or I'm going and I'm pissed off.
Oh, come on.
I tried to suggest to you that this is a book about identity, not about nationalism.
Okay.
You made a mistake. I tried to help you, to save you the embarrassment.
Can
That's
you
all.
come back with that at the end then when Ray's finished? Then
I can, but I thought to help him right now.
Okay, Ray, can you just finish off?
Well, only if he's going to shut up and not make me patronise.
You don't have to be rude. I really try to help you.
Ray, I can't believe that you're letting him be so rude. It's disgusting.
Well, let's just finish.
He made one single point.
Listen, you have to respect chosen people.
I'm not disrespecting him. He's disrespecting you.
I can cope with it. I'm used to it. I grew up among them.
I didn't come here, to listen to something.
It's okay.
hooliganism.
I will respect your right to be mistaken.
Would you like to sit there and be
No, I'm
quiet
sitting
till I
here.
finish?
I'm sitting here. I won't disturb you, but make sure that you realize that we have to...
Is there a time limit, by the way, on how long...
There is a time limit.
Can Tara?
Tyra, yeah.
Tara and Gilad, if you just come back at the end when Ray's finished.
I'm
so Ray,
staying
if you
here,
could just
I'm
finish... speak at the end when Ray is finished. So Ray, would you like to finish your piece?
Yeah, wait, stay there and make sure you shut up. Only a fairly loose and open definition like this can actually describe the nations of the earth. For Gilad, like Marx, nations are like atoms were in the 19th century. Discrete, solid little items bouncing around and off each other, and not as we now see them as moving, fluxing, complex systems, particles and changes. And in fact, structuralist theory, which, sad to say for the small party of eternal Leno-Trotskyist types, came along subsequently to Marx and Lenin, inscribing their canonical last words on the national question. Structuralist cultural theory, for example, understands nationality rather like atomic structure, a load of bits and pieces that hold together to form what they call a constellation, where the whole constellation holds the meaning by virtue of the meanings within it, through their relationship with each other, i.e. like language. But that's just by illustration to drag us a bit into the 20th rather than the 19th century, when the bearded patriarchs Karl Marx and Theodor Herzl ruled supreme. Gilad, in his book, has put together a host of arguments and factoids that to him, with his nuclear and old Marxist theory of nationality, seem to prove that Jews are not, cannot be, and never have been a pucker or kosher nation, and cannot therefore make any claim to any of the territory of what people now call Palestine/Israel. In fact, in his future fantasy novel, Guide to the Perplexed, he has the Jews booted out of there, as is the wish, of course, of Hamas and other Palestinian maximalists, i.e. people who want the whole thing, like Saddam Hussein, whose Iraq dictatorship Gilad claims on page 170 as one of the last pockets of Arab resistance to Zionism. Presumably he finds, like George Galloway in a recent comment, that President for Life Assad of Syria is another Arab hero. Just like Saddam, an unrestrained mass murderer on the side. Coincidence, I suppose. Nothing to do with the fact that the Ba'ath nationalist the Arab nationalist Ba'ath Party was very much influenced by fascism and Nazism. Anyway, Gilad finds in his book, and I'm just going to look at a couple of the biggies here and then shut up. He finds that the Ashkenazi, i.e. North and East European Jews, that their gene pool may contain genes from a Turkic nation, the Khazars. He also finds that the modern Palestinians may well include many descendants of Jews who lived in ancient or Roman Greek era Palestine. The Khazar theory, maintained by Arthur Koestler, is only a hypothesis because it's very hard to get concrete details about this short-lived kingdom in southern Russia with a ruling elite that converted to Judaism but then was swamped, I think it's by Islamic rivals. But I can match his hypothesis with my anecdote. My Jewish mother was a blue-eyed blonde. My guess is that came from some Slav ancestor. The Ashkenazi Jews lived for 1,000 years in Poland, Lithuania. It's where a major European Jewish civilization developed. The very same one that Hitler, Lenin, and curiously, as Gilad himself points out, the founders of Israel all rather despised. During that 1,000 years, there were lots of pogroms where the Jewish minority, who were forbidden by law to bear arms, were frequently attacked. And when you attack, rape. And when you rape, you get children. And under Jewish law, any child of a Jewish mother is a Jew. So I'm probably a little bit Slav. Is that why I like Polish beer so much? Or is it just because it's strong and I'm a pisshead? Only science could tell. My auntie, on the other hand, had lovely dark hair, dark eyes and classic olive skin. To me it's obvious that European Jews are a racial or genetic mixture, like every other nation on earth, except maybe for the Icelanders. My mother was Jewish, not because she had 100% Jewish DNA from Palestine, but because she came from a line of people who shared the idea, practices, superstitions and commonality of Jews. But let's do what Gilad either carefully or unconsciously didn't do in this book where he visits so many places and moments and authors. Let's look at another nation that claims a long history, the Greeks. In antiquity, the Greeks never had a Greek state. They had city-states that hated each other. Then there was Alexander's empire, then came the Romans. Then, of course, there were 600 odd years of Byzantium, with its Greek-speaking elite and its own version of Christianity. Come the conquering Turks in 1453, and most of them end up as subjects of the Sultan and living not only in what is Greece today, but in today's Western Turkey, on the shores of the Black Sea, in Sicily, Egypt, and so on. They were, and still are to an extent, a diasporic or spread out nation. In 1812, having read their Johann Gottfried Herder, and egged on by that lunatic Byron, they founded a new Greek state, which expanded and then, practically speaking, reached its current frontiers by 1922. In 1922, even after the expulsion of millions of Turks, there were still hundreds and thousands of Slavs and Albanians living in Greece. All of them pretty much forced to don a Greek hat if they wanted to get on in the world. Like the Jews, the Greeks didn't have a discrete territory before 1812 to 1922. They had some bits and pieces, Greek-speaking islands, but mainly they were minorities all over. Does that sound familiar? And they mostly had the same religion, and mostly spoke some form of Greek. Their culture, food, music, dancing was, and still is in many ways, indistinguishable from what the Turks have. A long coexistence. And by the way, like the Zionists, they had to cobble together a modern official language for everyone to speak and to write on the stamps and the coins. In fact, two. One based on ancient written Greek and one based more on peasant Greek, called Ethnicity. So, is the modern Greek nation a fantasy? A bunch of human facts and historical memories and scattered populations and cultural artifacts all welded together in the fires of the nationalist forge? Yes. Do they have more of a claim from history to the land of today's Greece than Albanians, Slav Macedonians or Turks? It's debatable. But don't try and debate that one in Greece. It would be like Gilad making a speech in a secular community well over the green line. Fireworks and then a lynching. Maybe you think I'm playing clever buggers here. Maybe Greece is especially complex and non-typical. How about France then? If there's a single nation on earth that nobody argues is a real nation, then it's France. In the 17th century though, France, with pretty much today's borders, the majority of its people didn't know the French language. They spoke Provençal, Breton, German, Flemish, Catalan or Basque. Around Paris, you had something that we would call French. People identified not with the French nation, but with their villages, their family, even their religion. Only after the introduction of compulsory elementary schooling and military service did everybody acquire that essential attribute of being French for French language. The nations are made. They're cooked. They're put together by historical movements or powers. They're not, as Marx and Gilad think, essential and eternal. So his argument that the Jewish people or nation is a historical fake is both true and not true. All nations are fake. All nations are also based on shared reality. I'm not going to go on much longer. I want to look at the burning issue here, really, the one he wants to stop, the claim to what Jews call the land of Israel. Most people agree there were Jews and two Jewish kingdoms in Israel, the land of Israel, but a long time ago. In the wider world, the Jews were often a persecuted minority, particularly in Russia at the time Zionism became a significant movement amongst Jews. And Zionists thought that a homeland in Palestine was a good option. To have their own place, get away from the rampaging peasants and anti-Semitic governments of good old Russia. That's the claim in brief. Heritage, homelessness, and the need for a refuge. The other major claim to Palestine, of course, is the Arab one. That's based on an Arab invasion of Byzantine Palestine, some settlement, and some religious and cultural conversion of the existing Christian and Jewish populations. Some people argue there was also a large Arab emigration to Palestine from the Lebanon in the 1920s, related to increased economic activity from new Jewish enterprises in Palestine. So the Arab claim is through conquest, a long history, through settlement and immigration, by being there. In my way of looking at it, it's a claim. It's not an absolute claim. It's Jewish history versus Arab history. The absolute Jewish claim, the one that the religious settlers make, is that the guy upstairs gave in perpetuity the land of Israel to the Jews. End of story, F off everyone else. As disputed as the land is, even more disputed is who does the city of Jerusalem belong to. Well, you know, the Jews point to some stones and say that's the wall of the temple. And there actually is a wall there. But there's also an absolute Arab or Islamic claim to Jerusalem. The Prophet Muhammad himself went there. On his horse. In a dream. And you can't argue with that. Not unless you want some brother to chop you up in the street with his meat axe. The reason why there's a whacking great mosque built on top of the temple site is because of that visit. Okay, and now I'm coming to the end with a serious reflection. The Zionists' argument about a home was just that, an argument, based on a notion of the Jewish future that only some Jews have ever subscribed to. But their idea of a refuge was prescient, and for good or bad, Palestine did shelter many thousands of Jews from what happened in Europe. On the bad side, 600,000 plus Arab refugees fled the Jewish side of the ceasefire line in 1948. The ones that went to the Jordanian-occupied part of Palestine became Jordanian citizens. The ones in or fleeing to Gaza, occupied by Egypt, were denied citizenship by their big Arab brother Nasser. I believe that in general, the refugees weren't offered citizenship in Arab countries, but had to remain as refugees along with their descendants. In the first Gulf War, their leader, the Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat, supported the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait. Subsequently, tens of thousands of Palestinians in Kuwait, many with excellent jobs, lives and prospects, were kicked out because of that support. Around 600,000 Jews from the Arab countries fled to Israel after 1948. In general, Jews in Arab countries were treated as dangerous enemy aliens and had their properties and careers subtracted from them. Though in many cases there were Jews living in those countries before the Arabs had even left the Arabian Peninsula, they became foreigners overnight. Israel gave all those people citizenship and slowly and with great difficulty integrated them into their society. In my maths book, as we say arithmetic book, 600,000 is equal to 600,000. So I don't recognise the Palestinian refugee question in the way that Chomsky, Gilad or Edward Said have seen it. I find their view lopsided. I'm going to end on a resolutely modern note about ethnic identity. This is an issue that Gilad briefly touches on but manages to leave out the wider picture. About 10 years ago, at the greatest university in our land, yes, that's right, University College London, where were you thinking of? Not stinky old Balmergast, surely. At UCL, a large research project compared mitochondrial DNA in two populations. Mitochondrial DNA is DNA inherited through the mother and is a way of detecting the relationship between human groups. The two populations were Palestinian Arabs and Ashkenazi Jews living in Israel. The study became quite famous and some Jews were quite concerned about it. Was it true that Ashkenazis had no historic relationship to the land of Israel? In fact, that study showed they are quite closely related. There are a lot of common ancestors. Gilad makes this point in his book quite forcefully. Many Palestinian Arabs may well descend from Jews anciently living there. But he doesn't mention the other side, that DNA as well as history and culture links Jews to the land of Israel. Because he doesn't ever give the other side of the argument a look. But I hope you will. Thank you very much.
Then it's the money if I'll just...
yeah, I was going to say, if anyone's got any questions, perhaps if we leave it to the end, because I think I've got like Gilad would like to...
Yeah. How many people read the book here?
Me.
Did you recognize any, in Ray's talk, anything that refers to my book even mildly? Because I didn't. The title of this book is The Wandering Jew, a study of Jewish identity politics. It doesn't deal with Jewish nationalism. It may touch Jewish nationalism. It is not concerned with Jewish nationalism. It is concerned with identity setting, and it compares Jewish identity politics in contemporaneous with marginal politics. It compares between gay identity, Zionism, gay identity, left Zionism, and so on, for different reasons that we can discuss later. Now, we have heard Mr. Kenoi extremely concerned with issues to do with biological determinism. My book has nothing to do with biological determinism. I'm not concerned about with any issues to do with Jewish genes. I know very well that there is no racial or genetic continuum between Kenoi and Yemenite Jew. What is interesting for me is that in spite of the lack of biological continuum, Jewish identity is racist. And this is common. For instance, it is more than likely that in Germany 38, there was no racial continuum between the different Germanic tribes. But Germany was racist. And it is not very surprising. This is indeed part of the development of late 19th century, 20th century ideologies, nationalist ideologies. Now, I don't know why this gentleman decides to compare Jewish nationalism or Israel with Greece. It's actually, if you walk on my the way I present things, I compare Jewish identity with radical feminism. This is what I'm doing in the book. And by the way, there are a lot of reasons to come up with such understanding of Jewish identity, and I'm working on it now actually, a lot to do with Frankfurt School. The major influence of Jewish left, European continental left, moving to America and planting Jewish secular tribalism in the heart of American and British discourse. And we can talk about it later, about who planted political correctness in your discourse and who planted marginal politics in the midst of your discourse. Why is it that left in this country is not concerned at all with work, but they are very outraged about gay marriage? Which, by the way, I don't have a problem with gay marriage, but I don't think that this is the main issue in this country at the moment. I just visited Detroit, you know, in America, a town that was reduced from 5 million people to 1 million people. And there is no work at all, and there is no prospect of future, but America is concerned with gay marriage, not with work. The most interesting question here is why this gentleman managed, or how this gentleman managed to misread such a simple book. A book that is now translated to 10 languages, and there is enough written about it. How is it possible that an intelligent boy, educated, managed to read a book about identity and to think that it is about nationalism? And when it happens, we have to ask ourselves, what did he try to do here? It's called Talmudic exercise number 12. He tried to kill you by boredom.
Oh gosh, yes.
And to make sure that you lose the context. Because it was, I wrote this book, and I didn't really identify a single point of reference. The most embarrassing thing, and you're an educated guy, if you didn't manage to realize, I'm not a leftist, I'm not a Marxist, I'm actually, it's not nice to say, a reactionary essentialist. I'm Heideggerian. I'm a German philosopher. If you read Guide to the Perplexed, and I believe that you read Guide to the Perplexed, I actually don't think that you read this book. Definitely not properly. You should have realized by then, I'm a Germanophilic essentialist. What does it mean to be essentialist? It's to take a topic, to take a cup, and to ask what it really means to be a cup. And it sounds like a very stupid question, but from this cup, Heidegger can understand the world. Because this cup is defined in this context by not being a book and by not being an Asbara proponent and by not being a spin master. The cup can be defined by negation. I ask myself, what does it mean to be a Jew? Not what is the biological context that formed the Jew, not what is Zionism, because if you read the book you should realize that I actually don't differentiate between Zionist and anti-Zionist, Jewish anti-Zionist, because I created a template that helps us to understand what is Jewish identity and what is Jewish power. Why do we have to understand what is Jewish power? This is the first question. 80% of your Tory MPs are CFI member. 80% of your Tory, of your leading party, are conservative friends of Israel. Do you realize what it means? How many of them are friends of Hartlepool? 80% of them are friends of Tel Aviv. Why don't we talk about Greek nationalism? And I would have less people here. Because the Greek lobby in the parliament doesn't try to push you to a war against Iran or Syria. But the Jewish lobby tries. And it is very successful. American foreign policy is dominated by AIPAC, by Jewish lobby. This is, by the way, not just the difference between Jewish state or Jewish lobby and Greek. This is also the difference between feminists and the Jewish lobby. The feminists have a strong lobby in New York and in London. But let me tell you, they don't have 300 atomic bombs in their cellar. And Israel has. And Israel threatened to use its atomic bombs. Now, I think I would be very happy if there was a bit of content to demolish in your presentation, but there was actually zero reference to anything I've written. I'm an essentialist. I'm trying to identify what is Jewishness, what is Jewish power. I try to identify what is it that makes you into who you are. In particular, I try to understand your kind of spin. And I present the answers in the book. This book is about you. And maybe it's about time that you read it. It is an attempt to understand it. Now, let's talk about some general themes. Shlomo Zand, you want to talk about nationalism. Shlomo Zand wrote probably the best book about Jewish nationalism. I'm sure that you read it. He refers to all those experts on nationalism. I actually have a chapter on Shlomo Zand because I think that he summarized it pretty well. Shlomo Zand argues, he's an Israeli historian, he argues that Jewish people is an invention. And he's probably correct. Jewish people is an invention. The exile is an invention. The march in Sinai is an invention. Can you believe that they were walking 40 years in the desert without leaving a single gefilte fish behind? No. Fine. Shlomo Zand is probably right. But then there is a big question. How is it possible that they are lying for so long and they get away with it? This is the question. And what is the answer? Jewish power. But what is Jewish power? You are not entitled to ask. But I do. Why? Because I'm a good saxophonist. And I know that I can say whatever I like as long as I play loud and fast. And I play loud and fast. I'm maybe not the best saxophonist, but I'm the loudest and maybe the fastest. So I asked myself, what is Jewish power? And let me tell you, it's not CFI. It's not the Conservative Friends of Israel. It's not the Labour Friends of Israel. It's not the Liberal Democrat of Israel. It's not AIPAC, and it's not the CRIF in France. These are just symptoms of Jewish power. Jewish power is the capacity, the unique capacity to stop you from asking what is Jewish power. This is what it is. Now, who maintain this capacity? Is it Dershowitz? Is it Lord Levi? No. Lord Levi is very proud about his capacity to get all those British politicians bowing to his pressure. No. The ability to stop you from asking what is Jewish power is maintained by the left. I don't know how this man managed to think that I'm from the left. I'm the most critical person of any left activity in this universe. It is the left, it is the progressive that try to stop us from asking what is happening there with Jewish power. It is the guardian, which is not the guardian of the truth, it's the guardian of the discourse. And too often, the guardian of the Jews. And it's very problematic. And we are not able to deal with these issues. How these issues are maintained? Two main templates are apparent in English-speaking politics. Political correctness and marginal politics. What is political correctness? Political correctness is a political stand that doesn't allow political opposition. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the definition of tyranny. But it is far more dangerous than tyranny. Why? Because in tyranny, you know who is your tyrant. But in political correctness, there is no tyrant. It's a Trojan horse that is installed in your body, and you start to bleep as soon as you start to think autonomously. Political correctness is there to teach you how to lie. When I tell you you are politically incorrect, what I'm telling you, it's probably right what you're saying, but keep it to yourself next time. Political correctness is a left exercise, vicious left exercise, that is there to detach you from your authentic attachment to your most precious tool, your tongue.
And to truth.
The truth we said already. Interestingly enough, an English guy spotted it all out. His name was George Orwell. He wrote 1984. He saw political correctness emerging. I understand now that he was probably very familiar with the work of Frankfurt School, that in the 30s, in the mid-30s, escaped to London School of Economics and to Columbia University in New York. Stupidly enough, we thought that Orwell wrote his book about totalitarian Russia. No. Orwell wrote his book about British left. He saw where they were going. It was a warning. But political correctness is just one side of those issues, of this political tyranny. Marginal politics, ladies and gentlemen. This book, that is regarded by some as, this is why I'm starting to teach philosophy in 2 universities now, as a major philosophical text. It's not about Jews. Jews are not just a test case in this book. It's definitely not about Jewish nationalism. I don't know how did he get there. This book is about marginal politics, marginal identity. Whether you realize or not, a lot of people around you, including yourself, start to talk as a Jew, as a black, as a Muslim, as a gay, as a transvestite, as a transgender, and so on. Why? Have you ever thought about it? It is very, very interesting. How many people live in this country? 60, 70 million? We have managed to reduce you into 25 Reform synagogues of Eze. From your perspective, from the perspective of the Jew, the Muslim who is silly enough to adopt this language, this is a complete loss of authenticity. Rather than thinking as Gilad Atzmon, I start to think as a Jew, as an ex-Jew. I adopt someone else's identity. I don't identify with myself, I identify with something else. From the point of view of hegemony, what we see is a complete control spiel, a control game. Instead of dealing with 70 million people here or 300 million people in America, we have to deal with 25 synagogues. What we see is the left that running this spiel, rather than being interested in working class politics, in work. Do you know what kind of corporate deals people are getting now? Like my son, when your kids, when they will have a chance to work, they will be able to be, they can get fired. In a matter of 20 minutes, they are with the box out of the office. How did it happen to us? Because the left, that was supposed to look into those issues, was engaged with gay politics, feminist politics, lesbian politics, Jewish politics. This is where we are. This is called the post-political condition. We grew up in a nice world. There were a lot of problems. But in liberal democracy, there was a mirroring, very interesting mirroring, between the human subject, us, and the politics. This battle between left and right was the battle between the dream and the real. The left told us what is ought to be, the real told us what is there. This was the battle between left and right. Some banal minds, like this guy who spoke ahead of me, thinks in terms of left and right. Philosophers, essentialists, reactionary people like myself, think in essentialist terms. I look at the spectrum, at the dialectical battle between left and right, and the exchange between human condition and the political system. This system has now disappeared. We have politics that is there to facilitate shopping, consumerism, and we have us. Our role in society is to buy We were buying for quite a while with the money that we didn't have, and now we cannot buy anymore with the money that we never had. And this is what it is. If we want to understand what is happening in our society, we have to transcend ourselves beyond political lame argument of left and right. We have to start to dig into the essence, into the matrix that made our society into, brought our society into such a problematic stage. We have to start to think essentially. And this is what I am determined to do. This is what I am doing in this book. It has nothing to do with nationalism. And I think that we have to reawaken German philosophical thinking. As far as I'm concerned, the defeat of Germany is meaningless. The elimination of German essential thinking, the thinking that brought us the best symphonies and the best philosophers, the only philosophy maybe, is the battle, the move forward. That's what I have to say.
Thank you.
Yeah. Do we have time for questions and stuff?
Yeah. I sort of think we've had two debates actually. But, this is all a bit too clever for me. But
By the way, it's too clever to me, and I hardly agree with anything I say, so it's not even a problem.
But I do think we've had one debate on the Jewish nation and what it is to be part of an Israeli state. And
This is a very interesting question, but you understand that it's not a question that I'm concerned with.
I mean, he's
At
not
all.
concerned with, Jewish cooking. So he,
what does Jewish cooking?
Well,
got to
just
do with anything?
you can make a point.
I'm not interested in Jewish
nationalism-
cooking. That's nothing to do with it.
No. This guy over here made a point that there's nothing in there about Jewish nationalism. There's nothing in there about Jewish cooking either. So that's, do you see what I mean? The point
In my
is-
first book, actually, I had one recipe, but I'm not.
Not in this one. So
Jewish nationalism.
It's about Jewish identity.
Jewish nationalism, exactly. Jewish nationalism is a very interesting subject, and there are some good text about it. But I'm really not interested in it at all. And actually, I accept Lenin criticism of Jewish nationalism without being a Marxist. Yeah. You want? Yeah.
Observation and a question. You asked when you began to speak whether we'd seen anything in the preceding speech that reflected your book, and as one of the people who's read it,
Yeah.
I did see one thing.
Okay.
In your book, you, as I understand it, you argue the theory of negation as being a very powerful instrument in creating the Jewish identity.
Definitely.
And I saw the preceding speech as a really live example of that. Not going straight for the issues that you debate in the book, but making an argument which is parallel and separate.
This is a very interesting observation. The name Edward Said was mentioned here, and I hope that I don't offend anyone. Edward Said was a major scholar. There's no doubt about it. Orientalism is a great book. Its significance to the world we are living in, it's hard for me to say it, but is probably zero. Orientalism was an attempt, and a reasonable attempt at the time, to present Oriental political correctness. You cannot say that and that and that on black, you cannot say that and that and that and that on Jews, and now please don't say that and that and that and that on us, the Arabs, the Orientals, and so on. But no one gives a damn about Edward Said. Nobody stops short of swearing in the parliament, in the media, about Arabs, Muslims, and so on. Which is interesting. Why Edward Said failed? Because he wasn't a Jew. What does it mean? I will speak now as a Jew, but I'm not a Jew, but I speak as a Jew. Huh? Because I know, I wrote a book about Eze, so I know how to do it. Jews have been practicing tribal identity politics for at least 3,000 years. We're extremely good at it. We know how to hold the dialectic poles. We make money in Wall Street, but we are the best Marxists. We have the Zionists dropping bombs, white phosphorus, on Gaza, but we are also dominating the Palestinian solidarity discourse. We always manage to move in as a dialectic force. Now, this gentleman is a proper tribal Jew. And this is exactly what he tried to do with the hope that it would work. And I don't think it did. And I am also coming from the same place. So I had to confront him. In the middle, it wasn't nice. And he was angry, but this is part of the show. We are very good in playing this spiel. Now, I explain in the book why. Most religions, most ideologies teach people how to be authentic and part of their surrounding environment. You learn how to love your neighbors, how to love your lake, how to love the mountain. Judaism, as we know it, was created in Babylon. It was created in Babylon.
Ask a question so he doesn't have the whole show. I wanted to ask.
Excuse me, you didn't. No. You didn't. You didn't. You don't want to do
I'll finish.
You shut your face.
Hey, come on, please.
I'll finish this point, and I want to hear your question.
Rude.
Okay, thank you.
You're letting him go on and on.
No. I want to hear his question. I just finished this point because it's an important point. It was born in Babylon in conditions that were very similar to 8th to 19th century Europe. Assimilation. There is a big threat. The Jewish identity is about to disappear. And they create a very unique religion that ties the Jew to the homeland, to a different place and to a different time. So the Jew is always in a transcendental point. He is never part of his surrounding community. You have people coming from Pakistan to this country, and after 30 years, 40 years, they're English, they're British. But we have here 2,000 people like this gentleman, who are still connected to a land he never been in. You know, they are connected to a land and they come back. How would British people feel if a bunch of Italians come tomorrow to Piccadilly Circus, they start to dig? They stop all traffic in London. And after 2 weeks, somebody realized that they don't have any authority, and you ask what is going on, we are Italian, this was Rome. This is exactly the same argument. The Italian wouldn't get away with it. The Jews get away with it because we are connected to a different place and to a different time. This is, by the way, the Zionist disaster. Because they managed to come back, but once they were there, they realized that their entire religion and ethos is collapsing. It is collapsing because they lost the detachment that is inherent to their identity. This is why they need the Palestinian as enemy. This is why they built the biggest ghetto walls in Jewish history. And this is why they're so vicious to the Palestinians. Because they need the negation. They need the negation. They cannot think in peaceful terms. I really recommend, I just got it from Amazon. Apparently you can buy it. All of you, to read Bernard Lazare. Have you heard about Bernard Lazare? Bernard Lazare was a friend of Dreyfus late 19th century, he wrote a book. He tried to understand why Jews have been expelled from every town they ever lived in. It's just a question of time. It's a tragedy. And he was mistaken. He thought that Zionism would solve it. It didn't. Anyway, sorry, you wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, okay. Almost about what you said in your spiel about political correctness. I thought what you said was interesting. I like the thing about the control of the tongue.
About what?
The control of the tongue. The
Yeah.
sort of inner.
You approve of it?
Inner cop is a sort of crude way of putting it. Yeah, I approve it. I think. I think that's a good elaboration. But it's just a very minor, polite question. Where do you think that term, political correctness, comes from? Where does it start in the English language, at least?
I can tell you exactly because I'm working on it.
Mm-hmm.
From Gramsci. From Gramsci, the Italian Marxist, who realized that the socialist, the Marxist revolution, the communist revolution, whatever, wouldn't happen through the working class. He started that what they really needed is to start to find the means to control the culture. It was then adopted by Frankfurt School.
Right, can you cite me the Gramsci where you find that statement? I can read Italian. I'm really interested in.
I cannot really.
You cannot, because I don't think it comes from Gramsci. Let me just briefly say, I think where I come across it is in English translations of high Stalinist literature, which was picked up by the American Communist Party, CPUSA, which was an important... Hang on, let me just finish my little bit. I'm never going to say 10% of the amount that you obviously come out with. It was picked up by the very Stalinist CPUSA, which was an important political force in the United States in the 30s. And that's where I see it coming from. I think it comes from this police state, where the Communist Party really controls the discourse. I mean, if the guys are doing it, they're not doing a job like...
I will try to help you. I'll try to help you.
Anyway.
I'll try to help you. I think I'm looking...
you didn't manage to quote the Gramsci.
No, I'm sorry. I didn't come. You're right. I didn't come here. I didn't come here with Gramsci.
So it's open.
You are welcome to look into it, and I'm writing a book about it. When it comes to Frankfurt School, it's very clear to me. I'm now finding Lukács.
Why don't you let that guy say something? Or can't you bear to have other people talking?
For sure. But
Do you, mate? Just me?
So polite.
Man. This is what chosenness is all about. This is what chosenness is all about.
Let some other people have a bit of a word. Be interesting to see.
Listen, you asked me a question.
Yeah, you answered it.
No, I didn't. I think.
Let someone else say something.
Oh look, this is getting turned. It's boring now. Honestly, like two kids fighting over some.
Yeah, he called me a boy.
Some sweets,
yeah.
you know.
I want. It's a very crucial question. I think that it's a crucial point.
What did that guy want to say? I'm interested.
No,
Yeah,
crucial
I'm
point.
Another voice, diversity.
I'm interested as well.
Well, then let's hear what he has to say.
Oh my gosh.
You want to hear his voice the whole time, but not necessarily everybody else. They spent 2 years with everybody else. Okay, I'm asking for someone else's voice.
Yeah, maybe Dennis, maybe this gentleman has to leave. I think that.
No, you finish
Okay,
the point.
okay. The issue about Stalinism. There are some theoreticians that argue that political correctness comes from Stalinism. I actually find it very hard to believe or to accept it, because I cannot see Stalinism being so successfully enrooting itself in American and British culture at the time of the Cold War. But when it comes to Frankfurt School, that managed to get a platform in London School of Economics, and Columbia University, probably the most important university in New York. And when we look at the role of Marcuse at the '68 revolution, we can start to think of Gramsci, Lukács, Frankfurt School being the element that planted this discourse in our discourse in our culture. The way I work on it, and this is the way I like to work on those issues, I actually try to interpret cultural event. Do you remember Archie Bunker? Could you see Archie Bunker in this country? No one, huh?
Yeah.
You remember? Was it somebody that everybody knew? Because you mentioned to me
He wasn't called Archie Bunker.
No, it was.
He was
only
Alf
in the
Garnett. Alf Garnett.
Yeah, we spoke. I just now. It was you who told me about that.
I sent you a link.
Yeah. I checked it out. There was an Archie Bunker, Alf Garnett. There was an Archie Bunker. Archie Bunker was an American Alf Garnett. Archie Bunker was a person that every American knew by heart. I realize that you English don't know it at all. Okay. Archie Bunker was the cutest, most horrid, chauvinist, misogynist, racist, bigot. But everybody loved him. He now won #5 most popular American character. He had a son-in-law, a nerd, Polish, politically correct. And what is amazing, it was one of the most clever construction in American TV. What was so amazing is that Archie Bunker, who everybody loved, became the character that nobody wants to identify with. Why? Because Archie Bunker was a working class, he was a World War II veteran, his son-in-law, Meathead. Check it out you will have a good time. Check it out on YouTube. Meathead became the new America. America made a conscious decision. Now, when we know about the intervention of Frankfurt School in American culture, it is pretty frightening. So I don't think that it is Stalin. Okay, but you have something very important to say.
Well, if any of us in this room understood more than half of everything today, I'll be impressed, because you both have put a lot of thought. But I was kind of interested in, why did you decide to put so much work and thought into your essay? I mean, that was a huge piece of work, with a lot of research and context and historical references. And if you didn't write the book, many people don't write books and write critiques. And I was kind of interested in why you decided to do that much work to present to us about this book, whether you were right or wrong about the contents bit.
Okay, well, it's a dull answer, because, as I said at the beginning, I did a lot of research into theories of ethnicity and the basis on which, if you like, political movements claim identity to try and connect it up. There was a way that I'd chosen to present it. So I knew all that stuff. What I had to do was to read the book. I recommend everybody read the book. I think you should see his arguments and how he argues for yourself. That's a much better argument against him than what I can do, because, as I said, he flips very briefly from one thing to another. So I just picked one strand where I felt I could back it up with my reading and even with my experience. So that's you know.
By the way, I like what you said about the analogy with the bus, because this is exactly. It was an argument, so but this is exactly how I want to write. I don't want to chew ideas. I'm not an historian. I'm not a political scientist. I'm a philosopher. I'm an essentialist. I'm a poet. I want to throw things on you and to let you deal with them. I want you to go on a bus. If you want to go down in the next station, it's fine. You want to travel with me? I was shocked 2-3 days after the publication of the book I start to hear from people that they read it for the second time, the third time. I just came back from America 4 days ago, and I met clubs of people who read the book for the fourth time every week. You know, it becomes kind of a cult thing. And I think that it is because of that quality. I really want to annoy people. When I read Heidegger or when I read Nietzsche, this is what happened to me.
You should travel together, because he's a great salesman for your book.
I
Debate doesn't get people wanting
Man,
to...
how do you know that we don't travel together? What do you really believe? You really believe in
Exactly,
that?
I think you're splitting the
It's not a real
royalties.
debate.
That's my suspicion.
Can we, have you got something to say?
Could I just follow on from that point? No, your question rather than the last point you made. But I don't agree with everything that's in Gilad's book. I liked the analogy with the bus too. I think that's exactly what he writes about. It's a stimulus to thinking. If you read the book, he does not come to a conclusion. That is very clear to me. There's a lot of challenging things. I mean, my background, I come from one of the oldest occupied territories in the world, Wales. And growing up in the 50s, my attitudes to Israel and the situation in that part of the world were formed by Lord Russell of Liverpool and the scourge of the swastika, and the attitudes formed around the Six-Day War were, this was right, that an isolated people should establish themselves. And it was only when I visited Palestine in the early 90s, just after Oslo, and was able to meet with people and start to see that things were not this situation that I'd grown up with in the 50s and 60s, that I started to challenge my own thinking. And I think that the interesting thing to me in reading the book is that you will agree with some of the things that are said, you will disagree with others. I mean, well, I did anyway, I don't know what you will do.
By the way, I also...
Sorry, let me finish,
Yeah.
because I think it stimulates thinking in a way that it says things that my generation wasn't allowed to say. As a Jew, this man can start to say things about the ways that Jews and Palestinians are interacting, which would be unacceptable for white Europeans to say, because you'd be echoing very unacceptable political philosophies. You're asking very tough questions. So I think that whoever it was that said, well, you were saying, read the book. It's worth it.
And 9
You
quid.
can borrow mine if you can't afford it.
I just want to say that I think, to me, I've seen you much more as saxophonist, and I've heard some of your views. I think your strength is your weakness, which is that you're an iconoclast, and I love iconoclasts, and it's great you're an iconoclast, and we need iconoclasts, but it also, there's something about iconoclasts that it could all explode slightly, and I don't know what you feel about it.
No, but this is absolutely... You know, I started with math. I love math. When I was 21, I thought that I'd never do anything but math. And then I started to read philosophy of science. And then metaphysics. And I eventually landed on aesthetics. And when I was dealing with aesthetics, I think that I'm not educated as a musician. I mean, I studied 1 year just to avoid dying in Lebanon as a soldier. Yeah, it's complicated. As a philosopher and as a person who was interested in aesthetics, I realized the text or a piece of music or a piece of painting are becoming significant when by itself it forms a genre. when I write, I want my writing to rewrite itself. And I understand that this is why people read the book 3-4 times. And I understand this is why I had offered to publish the book for so many years before I realized, no, there is enough mess, there is enough of a salad here to make people think. And it makes me think. You know, I remember that you didn't like A Guide to the Perplexed, but it was a very successful book. It was translated into 24 languages. And I remember that I started to tour with it around the world. And I'm in Argentina. And there are very clever people in Argentina. Everybody there is like a psychoanalyst. It's unbelievable. And I'm sitting with journalists, and they start to ask me questions. And I find myself saying, oh my God, this is what the book is all about. You know, I realize that texts should never get to the bottom of things. They should let you, the reader, me, the author, reshape. And what I'm doing now, I'm taking this book one step, many steps farther. I really don't care about Israel anymore. I know the pro-Palestinians here can be upset. I think that the problem is much greater. I think that the fact that Britain pushing now to a war against Syria, considering the fact that 80% of your leading party are CFI members, and exactly the same thing happened in France, which is exactly the same proportion. This is the issue. There is an identity that is very dangerous, and maybe we should end there, that is very dangerous to all of us, because it pushes us into wars, but it is also extremely dangerous for itself. One of the biggest questions that I can never answer is how is it possible the Jews, after all the suffering, are bringing the same disaster on themselves. And this is why I ask, what is Jewish identity? What is this lack of ability to mirror, to look in the mirror and to see how you bring disaster on yourself and everyone else around you? And this is a very important question, and I would be very delighted. A lot of my readers are Jews, but I would be very happy if I find out that this gentleman make an attempt to read this book with an attempt to understand what it is, and not how he just defend himself from the meaning of this text. Because this is what we need. These people, this book is a book about a very dangerous identity, far more dangerous than the Greek, and far more dangerous than feminists. Thank you so much.
Well, I'll leave it.
Now buy the book.
Yeah, but at the end, I'm going to get on it and crank that up now. If anyone wants to go to the loo, please can they do so now. The loo is through there on the left. There's a dodgy seat. The flushes, like the Italian train, it's about 50 minutes train system, and it's now floodlit lighting because the lights are fused. So all the best. But I want to.
What is it?
We've got floodlit lighting in there now. But I want you to go in and use the loo before I then pull over the big screen. So.
I'll see you in Britain.
You want to see this film, man?
I can't see the film.
Ah, you go to the jazz.
I promised to go to the jazz.
Okay, I'll see you in Brecon.
Take care.
I'm going to watch.
The big toilet.
Huh? I think that we will form a queue. A proper queue.
I don't come to see lots of energy being passed around.
Well, it's interesting.
Okay.
Hello.
I love your book.
The loo is through there on the left. There's a dodgy seat. The flush, about 50 minutes train system, and it's now floodlit lighting because the lights are fused. So all the best.
Indoctrination had led me to see myself or to look at the situation from an ethical point of view rather than from a Zionist point of view. And it became clear to me that I really didn't want anything.
Yeah, what I said about German philosophy is really great, you know.
I mean, for me, it's still really difficult to talk about anything related to.
I know. It must
It's
be.
complex.
It must be.
Yeah, just as eventually.
It must be.
Good.
You know, it
That's
must.
quite difficult in this country.
Yeah, because I think that if the Holocaust really means that we cannot talk about it, we better drop it.
I think we have to talk about it and remember it.
Exactly.
Good.